317 million people, 212 million drivers. This is America. But America has been taken for a ride.
There's been a monopoly on the fuel system in this country.
The oil companies invented the pump. They control it.
There is no competition.
You gotta choose. Do you want to go to the movies with your kids or do you want to buy gas?
It hurts.
We have the ability to stop using oil right now.
So here we stand. You got God with love in the hand.
All cars run equally well on methanol, ethanol, or gasoline.
The blood, sweat, and tears.
The United States started building flex fuel cars in 1994. There are millions of cars on the road that are flex fuel. The only way you knew you had a flex fuel car is that your gas cap was yellow.
What's the gas station in the future going to look like? It's going to look a lot different than today's. One of the reasons is look at natural gas coming along.
It's cleaner, it's abundant right here in America. It's American.
Until we have a moment of truth with ourselves, this country is destined to not only be addicted to oil, but addicted to all the terrible trappings that come with oil.
What's going to break the monopoly at the pump is entrepreneurs who build alternative distribution.
Spend about $100 a day in gas, now spending about $20.
We're under the impression that you have to change a ton of parts to make this run off of alcohol fuels. That is not true.
It's possible to create compelling, affordable electric cars.
That's the best part about being an American. We don't like it, we'll change it. The technology out there, the know-how is out there. We are going to be able to do this on our own.
Welcome to stage Director Joshua Tickell, Citizens for Affordable Energy founder and CEO John Hofmeister, and Pioneer Energy's John Brackett. Today's moderator is David Freeman from Huffington Post Science.
Hello. Hello everyone, welcome. It's good to be here to talk with you guys about this fascinating and provocative film. I watched it last night. And managed to get through the Vimeo cut, and it was pretty fascinating and provocative. So you offer you talk about a way out of America's oil addiction and the economic and environmental costs that brings. So before we talk about the way out, let's talk about where we are now. John Hofmeister, do you want to start with tell us where are we now in terms of America's addiction to oil?
Well, where we are is quite simple. We're in a monopolistic situation where we can only choose an oil product for our fuel. There is a rare breed that can have an electric car, but we haven't produced enough to make it a real competitive threat. There is some biofuel that's mixed in with the gasoline, but diesel is a oil product fuel as well as gasoline. And so we're really stuck in a place where we haven't seen competition. And it's the only part of America where we don't see competition compared to everything else we do in our lives. Whether it's housing, whether it's clothing, whether it's education, whether it's religion, whether it's food, we love competition. Why don't we have competition for fuels?
So exactly, how did we get here? What was the role of the government and the auto companies? How did we get to this situation?
Well, we've had a problem with quality of fuel throughout the history of fuel. So government has taken a very tough controlling role in regulating what's called legal fuel. Legal fuel is that which is approved by the Environmental Protection Agency. It must meet certain specifications, and so far we only have really 3 legal fuels: diesel, gasoline, and ethanol. Methanol is not a legal fuel. CNG is not really considered a fuel yet, so it's sort of quasi-legal, but nobody's doing anything to stop it. LNG would be the same. But if we really want to get going on an alternative competitive fuel, we need to ramp up ethanol and methanol, which are liquid fuels which can be used in flex fuel engines and can represent a dramatic increase in competition to otherwise oil product, which is primarily gasoline.
Right. So tell us more specifically about the way out, or maybe ask you, Todd. You're a longtime flexible fuel advocate, I believe. I think I was reading the 1996 or 7. You actually drove a van across the country. Tell us about that experience and what you learned, and what you see as the way forward here.
Well, I think it's fascinating, first of all, just to sit here next to John Hofmeister, who was, formerly the president of Shell. And
yeah, hold your applause.
Well, but one of the reasons why he's such a powerful voice in the movie is because he's for fuels competition. And I never imagined in 1997 when I set out in a used frying grease-powered van called the Veggie Van, vegetable oil van, that I would be sitting next to a former oil president. But it's a testament to how these disruptive ideas can come from very different places and come together. So, my objective in the 90s coming out of college was, hey, I learned that Rudolf Diesel designed the diesel engine to run on vegetable oil 100 years ago. And I said, well, what if we could do that today? That would be cool. And found an old diesel Winnebago, built a machine to convert the used frying grease into biodiesel, and drove it across the country. It was supposed to be like a 1-month trip. It turned into 2 years. And it was somewhat of a media sensation that sort of prompted me to write a book and make a movie called Fuel. And that's kind of what set me on this journey that has me here today with these fine gentlemen.
Well, tell us quickly how this movie came together.
Well, Fuel, there were 3 movies in the series. So Fuel is the first one. The second one is The Big Fix, which is about the BP oil spill in 2010 in Louisiana. And then, my wife, Rebecca Tickell, who often makes these movies, co-directs with me, we wanted to make a movie for the average person. Like, how do people take this information and put it in their cars? And that's when the idea for Pump was born.
So in the movie, and maybe, John, this is for you, John Brackett, since you're, I guess, an expert in automotive engineering, in the clip we saw a pump that had all these choices. So what sorts of choices are we talking about here? In an ideal world that you all envision, what are the fuel choices that we would have when we drove up to a gas station?
What my research showed is that most cars made in the last 15 to 20 years have the ability to run off of 3 different liquid fuels. Methanol, which is currently $1.20 per gallon, ethanol, or gasoline, and any combination thereof with parts that are already in the cars.
And so there would be those choices, methanol, ethanol, traditional gasoline, diesel. At each pump would have different nozzles to plug out.
We're not advocating for one fuel or the other. We just need a choice. It's based off a local solution. There are so many different ways to get these various fuels that we need to be exploring which ones to use.
So let's talk in the movie. Actually, Elon Musk made an appearance in the movie, and I thought, well, as I was watching this, why don't we all just switch to electric cars? So, John Hofmeister, why not just get everyone to drive a Tesla or a less expensive alternative to that?
I think eventually the fleet, maybe 40, 50 years from now, will be primarily electric. But we're not there today. We have 250 million cars on the road in the United States, just in the United States, that only have internal combustion engines under the hood. And if you look out over the next 5 years, virtually all the cars that were built in this country will also use internal combustion engines. The car companies have long-term planning cycles. So we're into internal combustion engines for about as far out as we can see, because most cars are on the road for 15 to 20 years once they're built. And so what kind of fuel are we going to use in those cars? If we're going to be dependent upon oil, and we know what's happened to oil in the course of the last decade, the price has skyrocketed, the geopolitics of oil is driving us all batty one way or another, and the consequence will be shortages and high prices if we rely on oil.
And that's also a part of the movie we were speaking before about China's role in all of this, because as the Chinese population gets richer and more Chinese people are driving, it keeps pushing up the price of oil. So what are kind of the economic issues here? And then also, what are some of the other costs, environmental, for this lack of, this reliance on one kind of fuel?
Well, one of the producers of the film, A.L. Aronoff, said, Josh, you've got to go to China. You guys have got to film the China energy story, liquid energy. And what's amazing about China is the number of cars. GM sells more cars in China than it does in America. So when GM had a bad year here in the United States and they were going bankrupt, they were doing fine in China. And of course, Chinese people, even though on average they make far less than we do, they're saving so they can buy that dream car. So the Chinese auto market, we have 250 million cars or so in the US. They're looking at selling 50 million cars a year in China, and they're not electric yet. So this is an exploding car population, which has, of course, commensurate oil demand.
So if China is part of the challenge for America in terms of its energy policy or reliance on oil, you also talk about a country that's an example of that got something right in the aftermath of the 70s oil crisis. Tell us about that.
Well, Brazil. So Brazil is an incredible example of what's possible, what we could do in America. You see, Brazil more or less does not import oil, meaning it has a net zero. It produces as much as it uses of its own fuel. And the way it does that is by using sugarcane and converting that into ethanol fuel. Now, the movie says, look, we're not advocating for everybody to make sugarcane-based ethanol, but let's look at the economics of Brazil. Brazil's economy was less than $250 billion just a few years ago. President Lula da Silva came into office, and in 8 years, the economy skyrockets to $3 trillion. And while the United States was undergoing a recession, Brazil's economy was going like this. And the central factor that we can see in both of those equations was the U.S. was hit with high oil prices, and Brazil wasn't. So now we start to look underneath the economy. Wow, what's driving all this? Wow, it's oil. And it just doesn't just stop there. It goes to our pocketbooks and to the American families, which is something that, John Hofmeister talks about in his interview in Pump.
Right, and also in the movie, John, you're talking about, there's someone who's interviewed and talks about these sources of energy, ethanol and methanol, can be local. And he says it's American, we just saw that. So what are some of the political aspects of a shift? What politically we have to change in order for the vision that you see to become a reality?
We've always thought in this country that natural gas was scarce. And so our public policies around energy emphasize oil, but not natural gas. We have learned with technological change that we can exploit, we can develop, we can produce more natural gas than we can wrap our minds around. That's a fairly strong statement. In other words, there is so much natural gas under the earth in the continental United States that we can't really imagine how much there is. Our minds don't work to that level of extent. And so what we haven't done is we haven't shifted public policy to put natural gas on a par with oil because we've always thought of it as scarce. In fact, when I became Shell president in 2005, one of my primary responsibilities was to set up LNG import terminals to get liquefied natural gas from other parts of the world to bring it into the United States. Well, horizontal drilling, hydraulic fracturing, and all of the technological developments of new forms of drilling and shale formations have opened up this incredible reservoir of natural gas. So from a political standpoint, we simply need to move the thinking of policymakers that oil should compete directly with natural gas because we have more than we will ever use.
Well, tell us about the connection between natural gas and ethanol and methanol and these other fuels.
Natural gas is a very flexible hydrocarbon. You can use it for all kinds of purposes. You can burn it directly, which we do on our stoves, or when we make electricity from natural gas. You can also chemically reform it through high pressure, high temperature refinery systems. You can turn it into any variety of products, from chemicals to ethanol and methanol. It simply turns natural gas into an alcohol fuel. Internal combustion engines can burn alcohol fuels under the flex fuel technology that John knows so well.
Well, right, that's a great segue. I was going to ask you, in the film, you show how to hack the fuel management system on a conventional car to make it so that it can burn other fuels. And I believe you said tell us about how easy that is, but what stands in the way? I believe you said it's illegal to do what you did to the car?
Yep. Unfortunately, it is considered currently illegal by the EPA. It's considered tampering. Yet, you call it hacking, it was already there. I didn't add anything. This was already in every car for the last 10 to 15 years from GM, and they purposely turned it off.
This is just software. You can go down a screen and see the menu and find out to kind of toggle on alternative fuels, basically, right?
If you have ever updated your computer or your phone, you can handle updating your car. It's that easy.
And is that happening kind of on an ad hoc basis? Are there people doing that?
There are tens of thousands of people already doing this. You wouldn't believe how many people I met on the message forums that were able to give me their tunes, so I had access to good tunes, bad tunes, across the board.
So you should probably explain to folks what a tune is, because they're thinking you're just downloading, new songs.
Best way to think about your car is it has software in it to keep itself running. Right now, you don't have to screw with little adjuster knobs on the carburetor anymore. It does everything on its own. It has all the sensors needed to adjust to the fuel you give it, just by sniffing it, changing it, and reloading. And what we were able to do is connect, reload our own software update into it with more optimized values, and run one of 3 different fuels or any blend in between.
So I'm wondering about winners and losers here. So maybe, John, that's a question for you. If the world changes in the way that you hope that it will soon, who are the winners and who are the losers?
I can't think of who the losers might be.
Well, there must be environmentalists who say you're perpetuating a dead technology, essentially, and we need to move to other forms of transportation.
But natural gas is 50% cleaner than oil. So the winners are consumers with lower prices for fuel. Oil and gas companies who will produce as much oil as they currently produce and more, but also produce more natural gas, which we will use for fuels. Environmentalists win because we use relatively less oil and more natural gas, which decreases the CO2 content in the atmosphere. Government wins because we create all kinds of new jobs, which are tax revenue creating jobs, and all kinds of investments, which will pay dividends to investors, which are also taxed. The general public and the American economy wins because this is like an economic stimulus. Freedom wins because we love mobility as Americans. And all you have to do is go out on a Sunday afternoon and look at the mobility across America, and people are driving at, half the fuel cost that they were used to? That's not a bad deal.
So if all these groups will be winners, why is it not happening? What's holding it back?
The power of the status quo. In other words, the forces that maintain the status quo, from not producing flex fuel vehicles to continuing to produce primarily oil products in our refinery system, our distribution system, our retail system, those are powerful forces, and they are special interests in the role in the halls of government, maintaining the status quo. That's number one. Number two, it's the legal barriers, the prohibition on adjusting cars. Instead of 10,000s, it could be millions if that legal prohibition wasn't there. It's the making methanol a legal fuel, which only the EPA can do. American citizens can't make methanol a legal fuel. States can't make methanol a legal fuel. So 2 simple regulatory changes, no taxpayer investments, no tax money needed. This whole system could build out on a simple platform of free market competition with the regulatory enablers to let it happen.
And so from a consumer standpoint, let's say, what would change? They drive into a station, there'd be multiple choices to make, and I was asking before, and I wonder what happened in Brazil, right? Are consumers able to make smart choices about all these different kinds of fuel in front of them?
They are. And one of the things we do in the film is we do a 3D CGI animation of the pump of the future. And what you see is, instead of gasoline and those choices that we currently have, which are false choices, 87, 93, 97, it's all gasoline, okay? So what the film distinguishes, John has mentioned natural gas, John Brackett has mentioned methanol. I've mentioned ethanol. And so we distinguish each of the fuels as a potential choice, as well as electricity with Elon Musk, the Tesla, the Ford Fusion, all of these cars that are coming out that are electric. So we show, okay, the pump of the future probably have 1, 2, 3, 4 choices, including gasoline, and an electric plug. So now, instead of you being subjected to, well, I got to choose this because I got to get to work, you go, which is cheaper? This one's cheaper, I'll use this one. And we interview average people on the street in Brazil. You know, the people we put in the movie in Brazil, they're not, educated scientists at the gas pump. They're just the people who rolled up and they talk to us, and they're choosing the cheaper fuel, which happens to be, in that case, ethanol.
So they would get an apples-to-apples comparison of these different fuels. So they might pick gasoline or ethanol one time and methanol the next time.
Exactly. I mean, what I wanted to make the movie about wasn't, hey, you should choose this particular fuel. It was, hey, there are these radically different types of people, but they're all essentially advocating choice. So what if we had choice? What would happen to the American economy? What would happen to our cars? What would happen to our gas pumps? Turns out there are lots of different choices. They all have pros and cons, but once you have a choice, it tends to spur innovation.
And John, also wondering, one of the things that environmentalists and others have said about using, say, corn to make ethanol is that it steals food, takes away from the food supply. You addressed that in the movie. Tell us a bit about that issue.
There's a significant food versus fuel argument, not so much in this country, but around the world. It's a global issue. There are people in this world who are still starving. We raise the price of food when we use food for fuel. And it was largely the primary election campaign of the year 2000 when Al Gore went to Iowa and promoted the use of corn ethanol that we got ourselves into this roll-up of this dramatic increase in corn ethanol. And many farmers have done very well, but a lot of poor people have gotten poorer as a result of it. It can be actually ultimately a moral issue, but for American politics and American primaries and agricultural states, corn ethanol is a very big deal. And it will continue to be a big deal. That's not going to go away quickly. But there are many other sources of ethanol. Biomass, any kind of biomass, can be converted to ethanol. There are richer and not so rich carbon formulas in the plant life. Coal can be turned into ethanol. And garbage can be turned into ethanol.
Well, tell us about what is biomass. Tell people what are the different kinds of biomass that are available.
Biomass is anything made from vegetation. So people use the term switchgrass, but it's algae, it's all kinds of fruits, all kinds of corn stover, not the corn kernel, but the corn stover, which is the stalk. All kinds of other grasses can be turned into ethanol. But in addition, we make cardboard from plants. We make paper from trees. All of that ultimate garbage could be also converted under various processes from using heat and pressure to make ethanol from what was once a piece of vegetation.
Well, another thing, I guess this might upset or certainly change the geopolitical balance between these nations. The film makes a point about how, and it's a really compelling graphic, that American military installations tend to pop up right near these oil refineries in the Middle East. And that by switching our reliance away from these other countries, is that a real argument? Is that simplistic? I mean, it seems like immensely complicated, the relationship between us and these Middle Eastern oil exporters, or OPEC, which is not just the Middle East.
It's a genuine externality in the production of oil product fuels that the American Navy keeps the sea lanes of the world open. And it keeps it open from pirates. It keeps it open during geopolitical periods of stress. We've all heard of the Straits of Hormuz. We could shut down the Arabian Gulf by closing about a 25-mile distance called the Straits of Hormuz between Iran and across the Arabian Sea. I think that is Oman, that cuts across to Iran. And if that were closed, 25% of the world's daily oil production would simply sit on ships or in the ground in the Arabian Gulf. It wouldn't be produced, it wouldn't be available. 25% decrease in oil supply stops the world in its tracks, just that quickly. The world has about a 30-day supply of oil that's stored or on the ocean that we can use, and then we have to keep replacing it.
But I can imagine, too, if all these OPEC suddenly loses its income, that might destabilize some of these countries. So are there possibly unforeseen, or have you foreseen consequences that might be negative that would result from this shift of reliance to the U.S. domestically?
For much of the last 40 years, OPEC has set the price of oil. If you travel the Middle East and you see what the oil money has done in the Middle East, you have the world's largest, most modern airports. You have the world's fastest growing infrastructure. You have all kinds of incredible wealth that is funding everything from terrorism to education, in a good sense. And it's all done through an illegal cartel, but there's no legal structure to stop it. The only way to stop the cartel from continuing to fleece Americans of their hard-earned money, or people from all over the world and their hard-earned money, is to create a competitive alternative to oil products. Because OPEC sets the production schedule of the world, which establishes the price. What gives these small number of nations the right to determine what is the cash flow net disposable income of Americans? Nothing. And so we can correct all of that. And yes, it would be a severe threat to existing Middle Eastern governments, but it's just one more in a series of threats. But they've had a good run for a number of decades, fleecing us of our money. It's time for us to take back our own destiny under our own choices.
Well, talk about fleecing. That's probably not the best word to use, but you as an oil executive certainly have been accused. I'm sure the industry is reviled in this country in many areas, right? So I wonder what do oil executives say about this idea, your former compatriots in the oil industry? What do they say about this idea of switching to fuel choice?
You know, I've talked to them. I'm not saying anything new that I didn't say when I was president of Shell. People can go back and look at my public testimony in Congress, and I was continually asking for increase in supply of fuel, increase in biofuel, increase in natural gas. I'm saying nothing new. And many of my former colleagues, competitors, would say the same thing. Because the world is short of natural resources to fund economic growth throughout the world, so no one in the oil and gas industry is concerned or perturbed. Now, there would be some refiners who would find themselves with excess refining capacity for gasoline and diesel products if, in fact, we went this way. But who makes methanol? The refiners make methanol. So they can switch from oil products manufacturing to methanol manufacturing. I spoke to one a few months ago, and he said, well, if that's the direction of the country, of course I'll adjust. I'll have to shut down some facilities. My shareholders will not be happy, and build new facilities. But anyway, I'm building new facilities for methanol because with all the low-priced natural gas, this country is going through a renaissance of petrochemical manufacturing with new construction. And he, in fact, was building a $1 billion methanol plant as we spoke on the phone. So when people should not think I'm altruistic in promoting these alternatives. I'm simply a business person who knows competition is generally a force for good. Free market is a force for good. And I believe and have believed, I'm not a lifetime oil and gas person. I worked 25 years outside the oil and gas industry paying for overpriced oil products. And so I believe in competition delivering a fair price, and we haven't had the benefit of that.
Well, also for you, Todd, I know you're kind of an expert on reaching millennials, and you're particularly interested in that. And I wonder if this idea of fuel choice is attractive to them, but also I wonder, is there sort of a convergence between conservative and liberal interests here that can push this idea, or is this still an outlier?
I can't speak to the political, interests, but the next generation, Generation Y, those people born between 1980 and 2000, also known as millennials, they're very interested in choice. And you can see it, companies that don't offer choice don't succeed in this marketplace. This is the largest consumer base in history. So I think the car is ready for disruption, just like the cell phone has been ready for disruption, GPS, computers. Once upon a time, there was something called a teletype machine. How many people know what that is today? Or if fax machines, people don't even use them anymore. So we are going to see a disruption in what personal transportation means. It's going to be something you connect your cell phone to your car. You're going to have apps on your phone that do different things to your car. You're going to be able to upgrade the software in your car, just like you upgraded in your phone. John Brackett is proof of that. And it is interesting to see, millennial interests and baby boomer interests coming together in a movie about fuel choice that shows, hey, Elon Musk, he promotes solar panels and electric cars. That's great. Hey, we can make American ethanol. I think that's great. Hey, there's this new fuel called methanol. Great as well. So lots of different choices. Let's let the next generation choose which one's going to be the winner.
So let me ask you, John Brackett, so what can individuals do beyond starting hacking their car? What would you like to see individual consumers do, motorists do, to promote this idea?
Number one thing you can do is change your car, is make your own choice. Otherwise, you really have to work through the structure that's already there. Call your local gas station, talk to your congressman, talk to your representatives, get them interested. To get more interest here tomorrow from 12 to 2, between 41st and 7th, we're actually going to be doing a live demonstration on a 2014 GM vehicle, just to show everybody what we're talking about.
Well, speaking of what I want to mention too before I forget, the film opens on the 19th, is that correct, at theaters in LA and New York and elsewhere, right?
Correct, yeah. Pump opens in select theaters in New York and LA, and then it's moving to other cities. And, I'm sure John's hack that he's going to do there in Times Square, I'm sure that's going to be online for people to watch as well. And you asked, there are kits, and we showed the kits in the movie. You can buy a kit, stick it on your car today. There's 2,000 gas stations that already sell alcohol fuel in the U.S. You can buy alcohol fuel cheaper than gasoline today. So there are options.
There must be an app that shows where you can get these alternative fuels, right?
There's an app for that.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
I want to ask the same question to you about what individuals can do. What would you like everybody in this room to do around this idea?
We have to get this key message to the grassroots of America. Special interests have the legal right to exist in this country, but they're not allowed to vote. Who's allowed to vote are the people of America, not the associations or the corporations of America. And so if we really want to see change happen, then the voters have to be made aware of this across a large mass scale to where this becomes an ongoing public conversation. We're having a huge national public conversation about hydraulic fracturing, and we should, because we need the toughest possible regulations to protect the environment while we develop natural resources to do no harm to the environment or to people. We need to have that same national conversation on the issue of fuel choice, which hasn't ever occurred. And so pump is a way of getting quickly to the mass audience of Americans who will ultimately make the difference by doing just what John said, talking to their elected representatives, insisting that if they want support for the next election, they support fuel choice because it's money in the pocket. The estimate is, by Fuel Freedom Foundation, that if we move wholeheartedly in this direction, we put $1,000 a year, new money, in every American's pocket, man, woman, child, $1,000 a year because of lower fuel costs. But don't forget, fuel costs affect everything else we buy. And so we get price breaks on everything else we buy. So I think it has to come from the grassroots to the political representatives that we elect to get the public policies we need to make all of this happen.
So I want to ask you the same question. What would you like people that you're meeting with in promoting this film and the people in this room to do to further this idea?
Well, I'd love people to watch the movie and spread the message of the movie. Even if you can't get to a theater, watch the trailer, spread it on Facebook, spread it on Twitter, pumpthemovie.com, and get connected into this conversation because it's going to radically evolve. There are going to be apps, as I said, very soon. There's going to be easier and easier and easier pathways to get involved, but it's going to take a critical mass. It's going to take a whole army of John Bracketts to get this done, and I know they're out there. So that's one of the reasons why we made the movie, to get people excited.
Okay, well, I wonder if we have time for questions. I'm not sure.
Thanks for coming. I was wondering if there's any downsides to electric cars and everything that Tesla is doing.
I was at the Tesla factory in May giving a speech on what I call the disintermediation of the fuels marketplace. And there's an issue between what I believe and what Elon Musk believes. He believes batteries are the end-all, be-all of electric vehicle propulsion. I believe hydrogen fuel cells are the end-all, be-all because they will ultimately be favorable to batteries in terms of cost and environmental issues. Mining lithium is not a clean sport. It's dirty. And dealing with the aftermath of batteries, cleaning up, decommissioning batteries, is again, it has to be done under very strict environmental conditions for it to be done right. Also, there are, in my opinion, limited quantities of lithium, unless we come up with another form of battery, which will maintain expensive batteries as a fueling system, versus hydrogen, which is surrounding all of us all the time. All the water in the world consists of hydrogen, 2 molecules to 1 of oxygen. So there's a limitless supply of very inexpensive hydrogen that we could use. I do think electricity wins in the end, however. The internal combustion engine, for all of our inventiveness and entrepreneurial capability, is still only 20% efficient at best. So 80% of the fuel we use is wasted as heat. 20%, I call it go juice. And so it's just an inefficient device that's more than 100 years old, and it's not going to get a whole lot better. So I think electricity is good. I think batteries are fine. I think hydrogen fuel cells will compete well with batteries in the future.
This is for you, John B. I just Googled on my phone. I have a Honda CR-V 2014. I just Googled on my phone that ethanol, like it's fuel flex or whatever, but you only could have like a specific type of, I guess, alternative fuel put in the car. Like for people who aren't savvy, like how do we figure these things? Like you know, I don't want to break my car.
There's an app for that. You can easily find local fueling stations. At the fueling stations, they actually usually give you a list of what vehicles are considered legal for E85. That being said, I have tested over 20 different cars on E85 with no long-term problems so far. I even mentioned hydrogen earlier. Those same engines I've even run off of hydrogen. We have options, and people need to realize that their car can adapt, and the fueling systems are available to give us solutions now.
Okay, I think that's it. Well, it's been a great pleasure. Thanks very much. Thank you, John Hofmeister, John Brackett, Todd Tickell. Thank you very much.